Hello, creature features. Today's t-shirt is... I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. That is, of course, the guy from the TV show Ancient Aliens, the History Channel show, which is one of my guilty pleasures. The show is total BS, but I think it's entertaining as heck, so I watch it. The other day I came across an article from Psychology Today online, and it is called... Why it's simpler to believe that everything is conscious. Physicalism is the view that the ultimate constituents of the world are something other than conscious entities. Physicalism is often viewed as the simplest theory of reality because it doesn't postulate any mysterious mind stuff over and above the physical world. Mind stuff is in scare quotes. However, the simplicity argument for physicalism ignores one very important fact: that our only acquaintance with the nature of the physical world comes by way of conscious experience. Interestingly, once we take this necessary starting point into account, we end up with the result that physicalism is not the simplest theory after all. The argument goes like this. The only concrete properties to which we have any direct access are the properties of our own conscious experience, the colors, sounds, shapes, smells, tastes, and sensations that philosophers call qualia. Now, these properties of our experience appear to change over time in a semi-patterned, semi-predictable way. The most common way of explaining these regularities in the qualitative properties of our conscious experience is by appeal to our changing relationship to something outside of our conscious experience that's nevertheless affecting it. Generally, this something lying outside of our conscious experiences is taken to be the physical world. But what is the physical world? And it goes on from there. I'll leave a link below so you can read it yourself. This seemed to dovetail somehow with a book that I discovered when I was in Ojai, California. The book is called An Uncommon Collaboration, David Bohm and J. Krishnamurti, and the author is David Edmund Moody. And I haven't read the whole book. I just bought it last week, and I'm actually reading a couple other books that are ahead in the queue of books. But I did read a bit of it, and here is on page 23 this interesting little tidbit. One of the most interesting ideas David Bohm, introduced in Causality and Chance in Modern Physics, that's a book he wrote, is that the universe is infinite not only in the quantitative sense of time and distance, but also qualitatively. Nature is composed of successive layers of matter and energy, and each layer has its own particular concepts and laws. It is mistaken to suppose that the quantum level is the ultimate and final. There is no end, according to Bohm, of qualitative levels of reality. A lot of the stuff that's in the Psychology Today article about the only experience we have of the physical world is our conscious experience of it mirrors, to me, some of the ideas in Yogacara Buddhism. Now, this is the only book I've ever read in my life that kind of goes into the details of Yogacara Buddhism. It's called Living Yogacara, and it's by the head of one of the few remaining temples devoted to Yogacara Buddhism in Japan. Yogacara Buddhism I've talked about before on this YouTube channel right after I read that book, in fact, and it's one of these things that I have to admit I never really understood all that well. It gets very intellectual and gets very into making lists and kind of ranking things and stuff, and it can be kind of dizzying to somebody like me who's kind of stupid. The basic idea of Yogacara Buddhism is very similar to what the author of the Psychology Today article is saying, that whether we say the physical world exists or doesn't exist, the only experience we have of it is our conscious experience. So sometimes Yogacara Buddhism is called consciousness-only Buddhism. And depending on which sort of Yogacara philosopher you're talking about, some of them seem to say that consciousness is the only thing, like the substrata of the universe, the most basic thing is consciousness, whereas others sort of leave it as an open question as to whether there is physical reality out there. Maybe that's true, but even if it's true, we still only know it through our conscious experience. Now, how Zen relates to Yogacara is one of these things I'm also not smart enough to really pontificate about. But I know that the Yogacara philosophy influenced a lot of Zen thinkers, including Dogen, and also including my own teacher, Gudo Nishijima. I remember him saying funny things like, we think that there's a table in front of us. You guys can't see it, but there's a table in front of me that I'm resting all my stuff on. But what our experience of the table is just the sensation in our sense organs. That's how Nishijima Roshi would put it. To which I always thought, well, you're saying sense organs, but sense organs are also part of the material world too. And I think this was more a problem of language on Nishijima's part than a problem with what he was saying. Because he's saying the sensation of it is all we really know. We don't know that there is a table. And these become very weird ideas. And there's a good way to take this, and there's a bad way to take this. And the bad way to take this, some of you are probably already aware if you're pop culture people, is like The Secret. The Secret says the mind is the basis of everything. Therefore, if I envision I want to get a tricycle, then if I think about it hard enough and kind of make it my vision board thing, then somebody will give me a tricycle. I remember seeing an example of years ago, some video, it was The Secret for Children, and that was the example they gave. This kid wishes for a tricycle, and then his somebody gives him a tricycle as a gift. That's stupid. That's clearly not how the world works. And it also makes people scared because you can go, well, if I think about cancer enough, I'm going to get cancer, and things like that. But there's no evidence of any kind that the world works that way. Another example of the bad way to take it is in the famous koan about the guy who stubs his toe as he's walking out of the Zen temple. And right now, off the top of my head, I can't remember the names of the people involved, although they're very famous Zen masters of the past. But we don't need to know their names. The guy who later becomes a famous Zen master, he's a monk, and he's getting fed up with his teacher, and he wants to go out and see the world and get new teachings. And he's marching out of the temple, and as he's marching out of the temple, he stubs his toe on a rock, and he's howling in pain, and he says something like, I was told that the physical world was just an illusion, but where does this pain come from? And that's when he gets it, and when his teacher says, what did you get? He says something like, I now know that I cannot be deceived. Which I've written about that koan in several of my books, or 2 of my books, I think, because I think it's a really interesting one. As the Psychology Today article points out, most of us are caught up in this idea of physicalism, that the physical world is the substrata for everything. So like the so-called hard problem of consciousness postulates the idea that we know there are physical entities out there, and that's a given. But why do physical entities have consciousness? What does that do for them? Does that help them in any way? Well, another way to put that, if you want to kind of go the way the author of the Psychology Today article goes, and the way the Yogacara philosophers go, is why does the physical world exist within consciousness? I think that would be a Yogacara type question. They would say, well, we know consciousness exists. We are consciously aware of things, but why is there a physical world that we interact with? Is the physical world something that appears because consciousness somehow wants it to appear, or maybe not wants it, or it's a kind of mistake in consciousness that makes it appear? That's one way of looking at it. Or the more standard way of looking at it is that the physical world exists and it comes into consciousness, which exists in individuals and entities. So I have an individual consciousness, and you have an individual consciousness, and Donald Trump has an individual consciousness, and Bernie Sanders has an individual consciousness, to be fair to both sides, and Hillary, and everybody else, and they're all separate. My own experience, for whatever it's worth, with this Zen stuff is that if I sit long enough and I work on this practice enough, and it took decades, literally decades, for this to kind of start to happen, but as I worked with it, the idea of consciousness as separate consciousnesses spread among many people, each one having their own individual consciousness, started to kind of vanish, and I saw that there is this connection, that everything that we think of as a separate thing, of one thing into another, is really more of a transition. And you can actually see this if we kind of take the David Bohm quote about successive different levels of reality. If I touch the book, here's another book that I bought about Yogacara because I found it and I thought I would never find it again, but I still haven't read it. If I say, here's my hand and here's the book, well, the closer and closer you examine it, the less clear it would be where the transition between hand and book comes, and when the transition between air and book is, because there's a bit of air, or a bit of molecules of the same sort of substance as air are into the book, and it's all very unclear. So if we go into these successive layers, the transition becomes fuzzy. My experience with Zazen is that the transition between minds, individual minds, also becomes very fuzzy. There is a transition, obviously, and I don't know what you're thinking while you watch this video. You're probably thinking I'm an idiot, but I'm just guessing that in my own individual consciousness. I can't really see into your head. That's an example of it. There is a single consciousness that manifests as these individual consciousnesses, and the boundaries become less clear. And my take on this whole thing is that trying to postulate whether the physical world comes first and produces consciousness, or whether consciousness comes first and produces the physical world, is probably the wrong question. You're making an either-or sort of problem out of it. And Dogen, when he addresses these problems, doesn't make it an either-or sort of thing. There is a passage in an essay called Mind Here and Now is Buddha, which appears in Shobo Genzo, and it goes like this. This is by Dogen. The immediate universe exists. It is not awaiting realization, and it is not avoiding destruction. This concrete triple world exists. It is neither receding nor appearing, and it is not just mind. Mind exists as fences and walls. It never gets muddy or wet, and it is never artificially constructed. We realize in practice that mind here and now is Buddha. We realize in practice that the mind which is Buddha is this. We realize in practice that Buddha actually is just the mind. We realize in practice that mind and Buddha here and now is right, and we realize in practice that this Buddha mind is here and now. It doesn't come across in translation, but what he's doing in that last bit is rearranging the 4 Chinese characters that make up the phrase mind here and now is Buddha. And he takes them apart and puts them together in different ways, and because of the differences between Chinese and English, you can't just do that with the English words and come up with the same thing. So Nishijima and Cross did what they did. Dogen's idea seems to not give primacy to either mind or matter. Mind and matter are 2 manifestations of something that is neither mind nor matter, but is something that includes both. So there's my take on that. On October 8th, I will be speaking at the Cleveland Heights Universalist Unitarian Church. On October 11th, Zero Defects will play at Jilly's in Akron, Ohio. On October 12th, I will be at the Akron Public Library Highland Square branch at 11 a.m. in the morning. Don't get it wrong, it's in the morning. And then on October 25th, I will be at Mystic Journey Bookstore in Venice, California. So those are my appearances. Zero Defects plays on October 11th at Jilly's, like I said, and apparently on October 12th at Annabelle's, I've heard too. Those are both in Akron, Ohio. Not sure about the Annabelle's gig, but be at the Jilly's gig, and we'll try to make it different. So there you go. That's the thing, and that's it for me. Thank you for being a conscious entity in this material world. We'll see you later.